Yo, welcome to my channel Ward Draws a Lot. Obviously I'm Ward, or I wouldn't have named it Ward Draws a Lot. So, I've noticed, and I think a lot of you have too, that the 90s have come back, weirdly enough. Now, for speaking in specifics, it's mostly the fashion that has come back, because I doubt anybody wants to get rid of their phones or technology. That has made life way easier. So, before I started drawing these characters in this style, I wanted to make sure I did some research on how everyone looked back then and what I can come up with. Now, showing you these images, everything was influenced by a whole lot of different things, which it could have been TV shows, popular celebrities, what the big fashion brands were doing at the time, and just overall culture. Even socioeconomic status and class played a part of how you dressed and who you hung out with, and in accordance dressing like those people, which is kind of the same we do today. Now, this even went into animation, such as anime. Shows like Yu Yu Hakusho would dress up their characters in these 90s styles clothes, along with other really popular anime shows at the time like Sailor Moon, or any of the bunch that were super popular during the 90s, and then transitioned into our childhoods, and then eventually growing up with that kind of taste and style that we like to see on TV. Which is part of the reason why I believe the style is making a comeback, because we would see all this stuff on TV and we would like it, but we were too young to actually understand the cultural involvement of it. And now that we're old enough, I think that's why we like to wear these 90s style type clothes. Not only that, but I really do believe that old fashion always makes a comeback. Somehow, someway, something from the earlier decades makes its way over to the modern day, but just with a modern day twist. Now, after doing all that research, I told myself, what is the best way to encompass the entire 90s fashion styles within just a piece of paper, which is a lot to take in. So what I ultimately thought of first was I have to do two characters, because one character of one certain style is not doing it justice. Obviously, there are way more styles that can be explored during that decade, but I went with what I thought were the two most popular styles within the cultural phenomenon of the 90s. So, the character on the left is going to be the guy with the same color suit that has a solid t-shirt under it and split part hair, because that was a huge thing within media. The variations of what was popular back then within that type of style was mostly just sticking to blazers, straight pants, kind of like a loafer shoe, and then we also had the split hair, which every probably like teenage boy had at that time. The color palette for that style consisted of very muted colors, so they would take whatever color that was bright, which from the previous decade, the 80s, everything was super bright, super bold, and they made it the opposite. They muted it out, made it dirtier, grungier, or just overall more gray. So I think that was a huge part of the 90s, was that they were just trying to go against the grain of the 80s. Now we can talk about the style on the right. So on the right side, I made sure to include the other half of what I feel like was some of the most popular 90s designs, which was outfits that had a lot of color, along with a lot of graphic design elements or some type of graphic design style within the seams or out on the shirt, along with jeans to jean shorts and sneakers. For the outfit on the right, I made sure to give the character high-waisted pants along with a shorter neon windbreaker, because especially within 90s anime, they always made the legs extremely long and the torso much shorter. But that was also in correlation to how cultures would wear it as well, because people would walk around with really high-waisted pants while making their torso look short. Why? I actually don't know, but I think it looks pretty cool, not gonna lie. Now, although both styles were pretty different from each other, they both still carried some major similarities that was just across the entire span of that decade. One of the things that I truly believe was the most universal throughout all the styles was cuffing up your pants. So everybody would fold their pants up a little bit, because buying oversized pants was the huge thing, but not everybody had long enough legs to fit those oversized pants. So as a result, everybody had to cuff them up just so they could walk around and not get them dirty. Some people didn't cuff up their pants and just let it hang down all the way to the bottom of their shoe, which is not it. Trust me, that's how you ruin your pants. But also because of those big oversized pants, everybody put their pants really high up to their waist just so they could make them fit, which is why high-waisted pants were such a huge thing back then as well. Which leads to everybody having belts. Practically everybody wore a belt back then because these pants were so large and they didn't want them to fall off. Belts eventually became a lifeline for the staple large pants wearer. Another thing I noticed was that layers was a very important and significant thing. People would layer long sleeves under short sleeves, and then on top of that would wear a blazer, a vest, or a jacket of some kind. So that's why I made sure to include for both of them, one has a windbreaker and one has a blazer on, because that was like the thing. If you wore even like a plaid shirt on top of a t-shirt with a graphic design, that was still in style. So anything with a jacket somewhat included in the outfit meant you had some kind of fashion sense. Now, how does this affect anime and artists, or just artists in general who draw people wearing clothes? As somebody who draws, when I'm drawing, I like to look at what's popular, what fashion trends are really cool, and what do I personally like as well, and then I put that onto a character I like. Things that you live through become your muse, and then eventually, once you look back at it, it becomes a product of its time. So, drawing now, I might be looking at my drawings thinking this is cool right now, but in 10 years I'm like, maybe that outfit wasn't so great. Just like how I look at my old sketches during the early 2000s and how a lot of scene and emo influences were in my head and I would draw that onto characters. I look back at it now and I'm like, I don't know about that. See, but that's the beauty of something that is a product of its time, is that you might not ever have that kind of time again. Some things that were popular in one decade might never come back, or at least maybe not in your lifetime or generation, or maybe it will, but when you're older and then you're gonna get to say, oh, they're bringing that back again? That's crazy. Which goes back to the whole fashion recycles itself thing that I said earlier. Let's also not forget that the number one thing that has made 90s fashion, I feel like, come back was the word aesthetic. Now, everybody says the word aesthetic, but it's more than just how something looks. It's more like an appreciation of an artistic movement that happened. So, like, the artistic movement of the 90s was a certain kind of aesthetic on its own, which is why people like it. But it's mostly the appreciation and the philosophy of how the art was built over that time and how everybody has grown to enjoy it. And in this case, it is the art of clothing. I personally think it's extremely cool that we get to look back on previous decades and see how they were affected because of the decade that was right before them. So the 80s affected the 90s affected the 2000s, and henceforth and so on. So a lot of the time it ended up being people who were trying to go completely against the idea of the previous decade, or still living in that decade and just passing it down with nuances that came with the decade that they lived in. I do think that the main factor as to why a lot of fashion changed over the years was mostly due to teenagers. Teenagers wanted to stand out or make something new from the previous decade, and it's even prevalent today where a lot of the time teens don't want to dress in what their parents dressed in just a decade before them or anything like that. So they wanted to stand out by making their own style and redefining a generation, which is what they did. So people in the 80s were just trying to combat the 70s hippies look, and then that's why bright bold colors came in and all that stuff. And then the 90s, you had them wanting to combat the bright colored looks, and then they went totally grunge. And then 2000s, which was the worst of all, was just everything really low cut, really showy, really all that stuff. So it was a completely different generational experience between everything, and that's what's cool about it, is that there really is a generation defining moment, especially with younger people, and they don't realize how much they truly impact the style that was happening until later on when they look back at it. So yeah, I just think that that's a cool little piece of context as to why we dress the way we do and why we go back to it, and along with why we still like it or why we still don't like it. So now I just want to talk about the drawing real quick. I really like how it came out. I felt like I really got both the styles down, along with showing their personalities a little bit through their clothing. I also put in very 90s graphic designs backgrounds that we would see everywhere, or at least I would see everywhere when I was younger. I don't know about y'all youngins now. I don't know if y'all know those designs or not. This is, Okay, so besides remembering the fact that I'm old, I really had fun doing the research for this and then coming up with the characters and putting them in that clothing style. And I had a lot of fun, and I might even do this again one day. But for now, thanks for watching, and remember I love you. Bye.